I invite you to open your Bibles to Mark 24:30. And I know we all have different versions, but sometimes it's nice to hear or read the different versions and hear the different nuances that it takes. Mark 7:24-30. Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. "First, let the children eat all they want," he told her, "for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Lord," she replied, "even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he told her, "For such a reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." She went home and found her child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone.
When was the last time you were exasperated? I'm assuming that we've all been exasperated or frustrated at the end of our rope, pulling out our hair for some reason or another. And for some of us, maybe those moments come more often than we wished. I think feeling exasperated is part of being human. Perhaps we have a job that can sometimes be stressful. Perhaps we have children that are pretty demanding. Perhaps we have made a request for something to be repaired or to be attended to, and nothing happens. Quite a number of circumstances in life can provide reasons for us to feel frustrated or exasperated. Times when we just want to escape and get away from whatever it is to gain new perspective and get some relief. I suspect that Jesus, too, in his humanness, also had times when he was frustrated or irritated. Jesus did work with a pretty dull-minded disciples who had a hard time catching on, who argued over who was the greatest, who had eyes that didn't see and ears that didn't hear, and couldn't really figure out what this upside-down kingdom was all about. And as much as Jesus taught and tried to model for them what he wanted, they still didn't get it. It certainly seems that is likely that Jesus got exasperated. I imagine that Jesus had times when he was exasperated by the Jewish leaders as well, who were quick to criticize Jesus for not following what was expected of a good Jew. In fact, just before the incident in our text for today, Jesus had a heated confrontation with the legalistic, tradition-bound scribes and Pharisees who were indignant that Jesus' disciples were disregarding the laws governing ceremonial cleansings. The disciples have come from the marketplace and proceeded to eat with unclean hands. I doubt that they really cared if the disciples got food poisoning from contaminating their food. What really mattered was that they were breaking the rules. Likely, these scribes and Pharisees thought that Jesus would straighten out his disciples, but instead, Jesus points out their hypocrisy, noting that what really mattered was not tradition or following the rules. What really mattered was a pure heart. Couldn't they understand that? Now, after this intense confrontation, Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre, which is a region away from the Sea of Galilee toward the coast of the Mediterranean. And he traveled into this mostly Gentile area. He wanted some time away from all the crowds who had followed him for his teachings and witnessed all his great miracles. A trip to the coast is just what Jesus needed, to have a break, to get some rest from his exhausting schedule, to get back his energy, and maybe to regain his composure. perhaps in this remote, out-of-the-way place, he could find some peace and quiet. But Jesus was found by a desperate Gentile woman. This Gentile, Syrophoenician woman had everything going against her when she pushed her way into Jesus' presence. One could say that this woman was a born loser on 3 accounts. One, she was female, not the right gender. She was Greek, a Gentile. That put her on the wrong side of this big divide between Jews and Gentiles. And thirdly, she was of Syrophoenician origin, which identified her by her race and her religion, linking her to the Old Testament Canaanites, also not part of the Jewish nation. This was the woman who came to Jesus with her request. She had no right to engage Jesus in conversation. Yet, despite the dictates of custom, this woman approached Jesus. She was driven by something more powerful than protocol. She was desperately afraid for her daughter's life. Her child was suffering from an unclean spirit within her. She had watched her tormented daughter, heard her cries, and was powerless to help her. But she had heard about Jesus somehow, a great teacher and healer, and she courageously approached him. And she bowed down before Jesus and begged him, pleaded with him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Now we would expect our kind, loving, gentle Jesus to say, well, of course I will heal your daughter. For isn't that what Jesus was all about in his ministry? But he does not respond in this way. Rather, he says to her, let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Whoa, we wince. Jesus said what? Did we hear correctly? Did Jesus just call this woman a dog? Is this our compassionate Jesus talking? And so we got to read it again. We have to see if we missed something. Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. So we wonder what tone of voice Jesus used. But it's clear that Jesus is flatly refusing this woman's request and used one of the most derogatory terms that Jews used when referring to Gentiles, dogs. Now, some commentators have suggested that the word dog is not as harsh as it might sound to us, that Jesus is merely referring to her as a pet little puppy in this analogy. But other commentators see Jesus' response as pretty stern and insulting. How serious is he? Is Jesus just jesting? Is he just testing this woman's faith? That's what I learned growing up when I had this encounter with this story, that Jesus was just simply testing the woman. But I wonder, remembering the contentious encounter with the Jewish religious leaders earlier, perhaps we could see Jesus as being exasperated, that once again someone is not getting what his mission is all about. Or perhaps we might infer that Jesus was simply exhausted after his long ministries and responded initially to the woman out of his own deep-rooted Jewish tradition in a very human manner. However harshly we might hear these words, it is a definite refusal by Jesus to the request of this woman. Jesus is telling this desperate woman that his mission is first for the Jews and the Jews only, not to the Gentiles. And she is a Gentile, not part of the favored group. Favoritism is not a new thing. Favoritism is played out in so many ways in our own culture, in our own day. We place value in a myriad of ways. We judge by our bodies, by our minds, by our gender, by our education, by our age, by our color of our skin, by the size of our homes, by the size of our 401ks, by how well our children do. And we could go on and talk about all those ways. There are hundreds of ways to decide who we might choose to be our favorites, which is in essence means determining who is to be included in my particular group and who must be excluded. And so we set up rules and qualifications on who can be considered an insider and who has to be on the outside. And we erect walls and borders to distinguish who is in and who is out. There are many examples of favoritism. We find ethnic favoritism or exclusionism has been played out in real life in various places. In Nazi Germany, only the pure German race was acceptable, and Jews were excluded and done away with. In South Africa, during the decades of apartheid, the white minority ruled, causing racial segregation throughout their political and social systems. And here in the United States, in not the too distant past, there were signs posted, whites only, excluding those whose skin color was different. We also see signs of economic favoritism in organizations and political systems where the wealthy have the power and make decisions that favor themselves, causing those with less means to have diminished influence and find themselves losing ground economically. A wall is created between the haves and the have-nots. Unfortunately, favoritism creeps into the church as well. It appears it was a problem in the early church, for the writer of James admonishes the believers not to show favoritism, not to give the wealthy the preferred seats and the poor are placed on the floor. I wonder how we have played favorites by including only those who look like us or have the same cultural heritage as us or think and believe the same things as us, the favored ones. On a personal level, I know I play favorites. I choose to spend time with those others who are mostly like me, those in my Mennonite bubble. I know it's far too easy for me to judge and exclude those who are different from myself, rather than try to find a way to find commonalities. To quickly decide who I considered my close inside group and who are on the outside. To pick favorites. Jesus played favorites, denying the request of the Syrophoenician woman. Many who suffer crushing words of rejection like she did might have crept away, feeling small and insignificant, but not this desperate mother. She could not accept no for an answer. So she boldly and tenaciously responded to Jesus, "Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Her "yes, Lord" suggested that she indeed knew who Jesus was, and she recognized Jesus' mission. And yet she would not accept nothing. This Gentile woman's insightful reply indicated that she accepted the priority of the Messiah's mission to the Jews first, and was not looking for a seat at the favored table, but would gladly accept a small crumb, which would surely be enough, a small amount of grace. Jesus had met his match and instantly understood her challenge. He had to change his mind because of this quick wit and the faith of this Greek woman. Jesus had to think again, to act according to the good news he had come to deliver and to embody. His mission was not to be restricted just to the Jews. God's love expands beyond all barriers. Jesus' vision was reoriented and expanded. Rather than scolding her for her brashness, Jesus commended her outspokenness and told her, "For saying that, for having faith like that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." And the woman went home and found her daughter healed. This healing brought about changes in the life, not only for this Gentile woman and her daughter, but also a change in Jesus. At the beginning of this encounter with this woman, Jesus saw her as a Gentile, a non-Jew, a woman, someone with low status, someone a Jewish man did not really need to deal with. But at her persistence, Jesus no longer saw her as a type or a category or a demographic, but he saw her as a person in need of the compassion of God. The Syrophoenician woman called Jesus to a mission of infinite compassion and mercy to all. This woman broke through the walls that separated and divided with courage and persistence, believing that grace would be given, believing that God's love was to extend to everyone, even to her. New Testament scholar Mitzi Miner writes that Mark gives us God's initiative in this story. Jesus' action illustrated that a worthless Gentile girl whose mind was devoured by a demon was indeed a child of God, to be embraced and valued. Humanity's authentic response to God's initiative calls forth recognition that there are no external barriers between God and any human being, not race or class or ethnicity or gender or age or physical condition. Consequently, there should be no barriers between each other as human beings. The kingdom of God is to include all people. God does not play favorites. The walls that separate and divide are to be broken down. Being with people whose circumstances are different from our own, or whose race or gender are different, or whose life experience is different from our own. Being with people like this can open new understandings for us, even as it did for Jesus. Our world is open to new possibilities, and we are awakened to see things in new ways as we encounter individuals different from us. These encounters happen when young adults take a year to volunteer with Mennonite Voluntary Service or MCC SALT or other similar organizations. Young men and women from rural settings venture into a city like Chicago or Washington, D.C., or even go to countries like Rwanda or India or Honduras to help people from a variety of backgrounds and develop relationships with them and have their perspectives changed and transformed. God is at work, breaking down racial and ethnic barriers. These encounters happen when church families and couples volunteer with MDS or other service organizations. I've heard stories of hard work done and the completion of repairs and rebuilding accomplished. But more importantly, I hear stories of how volunteers took time to sit down with homeowners and to hear their stories and their dreams, building relationships that changed their perspective. New friendships were created. God is at work breaking down economic and social barriers. These encounters happen when two mothers talk together. One, a Mennonite mother who believes in peace and nonviolence, and the other mother whose son has joined the military. And these two women are able to share their differences, but also their commonalities in their dreams for their children for the future. Talking face to face, they see a new perspective. God is at work, breaking down barriers. Who is God inviting us to love, to welcome, to accept? Who is God inviting us to include with genuine hospitality in our lives and in our church? Hospitality for most of us means being patient and polite while we wait for the newcomer to become like us. But can we understand hospitality as a willingness to be open to the distinct gifts and perspectives of someone who is different? Can we even imagine that hospitality is openness to receive people who are different from us as gifts, to receive them as gifts of God given to change and to stretch us? To change and stretch us in the same way that Jesus was changed in his encounter with the Syrophoenician woman. Or perhaps to recognize the walls that divide us, and like this woman, with persistence and courage, to do what is needed to tear down those walls. I invite us to risk encountering others who are different from ourselves, to gain new understanding and be transformed and indeed be changed. May we see God at work, opening our eyes and our ears to new ways to break down barriers, so that God's compassion and mercy are open to all people. May it be so. I invite you to take